Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Fazbear Entertainment would like you to put your hands together for the one, the only, Freddy Fazbear.
Rewritten! Woo! Okay, I'm gonna try and make this fast. Hello, people! This is a really quick warning. This is chapter 13, not chapter 12. Last week, I released chapter 12 really late because my iPad got constipated from how many episodes I've made, and it almost died because of how big DJ's episode was. It was literally an hour long, so if you ended up missing chapter 12 last week, you gotta go back and watch that one first, because this chapter immediately opens up on like 5 different spoilers for chapter 12. So, if you got turned around and missed it last week, you gotta go back to chapter 12 before reading this one. Otherwise, you'll get a bunch of spoilers. So, yeah, that's it. If you're in the right place, thanks for coming here. I hope you enjoy the show. Woo! The moment DJ opened the auditorium doors, the distressed yells that had been echoing around inside were finally given the opportunity to reach their ears. Gregory? Moon? Can you hear us? Are you okay? It was mostly Freddy, who was down from the stage and searching for any sign of them, the others looking like they were about to start doing the same. Freddy looked to the open door, calls faltering whenever he saw DJ's white eyes beaming into the void of black. "We're okay!" Gregory called, waving at him as DJ ducked to enter the auditorium. "I got DJ's chip out!" "Oh, thank goodness!" Freddy breathed, hurrying towards him. "What happened? What was that huge noise?" "The tunnels broke," Gregory explained. DJ and Freddy met in the middle of the auditorium, the giant robot tilting his hand to let Gregory slide off. He got up as fast as he could, legs still a bit wobbly from the ordeal, running to Freddy. He kneeled down, taking Gregory up into a big, warm hug. "I was so worried," Freddy said. "We all heard the crash. I thought something horrible had happened to you." When Freddy loosened his grip, DJ held up his many hands, getting his attention by showing a series of gestures to Freddy. "He says he's sorry for chasing you," Freddy translated, "and thanks you for getting rid of the chip, and," he tilted his head, finishing it with, "and for breaking his tunnels." "You're welcome," Gregory offered a smile. "Where's Moon?" Freddy asked, looking over his shoulder. "Is he okay?" DJ lowered the hand that was holding Moon, signing what looked to be an explanation. "Okay," Freddy nodded. "It's good that we're about to go to parts and services, then." He took Gregory's hand, leading him back to the stage where the others were waiting. DJ followed, each of his multiple footsteps sending vibrations through the floor, one hand still keeping Moon held carefully aloft. The dark blue nightcap dangled off the edge of DJ's fingers, the bell clinking feebly. Roxy, Chica, and Monty were still in their original spots, watching them return anxiously. Freddy climbed back up on stage with Gregory in tow, everyone ducking as DJ crawled over them, settling in place at the back. DJ tapped around, finding a large button on the floor that had popped up since the end of the song. He stepped on it. The platform beneath them jerked with a loud clank, frightening Gregory into clinging tight to Freddy's leg again. Freddy kept a reassuring hand on his back as their section of the stage began to sink down into the floor. Everyone gathered carefully away from the walls as they slid into darkness, out of view from the rest of the auditorium. They went down, 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 the light of Roxy's markings not really able to illuminate anything important. When the ceiling hole closed up above them, DJ's big white pupils became the only reliable light source, revealing the pistons and gears carrying them down below the stage. They lowered to a stop with another clank, a large room revealed to them. The spotlight of DJ's eyes chased away the darkness, casting around to show them where they had ended up. Gray walls boxed them in, dark and dry. Large wrenches and drills and other tools covered the walls of the room that they were in, outlined with deep black shadows that greedily ate up DJ's light. Cubbies in the walls each had labeled tubs inside, holding what looked to be like clumps of white metal. A small hall led out into more darkness, 6 gray doors lined up on either side, each labeled with a small off-white plaque that he couldn't read at this angle. The doors were all thick and reinforced of steel, large circular locks set on the outside, making them look like huge vaults in a bank. Surrounding the circular platform they had come down on was a pit, almost like a moat around a castle. But rather than water, they were surrounded by piles and piles of broken bodies. At first, Gregory recoiled, thinking that they were corpses, but he soon saw, without much more relief, that they were all metal. The pit was mostly comprised of staff bots. Broken arms and blacked-out eyes stuck out beneath layers of dark red rust, each helpless machine bent and twisted in various directions, infested with frayed wires. All of them were piled together carelessly like bodies waiting to be burned, abandoned forever in a twisted tangle of misery. The smell of it was like 2 wet pennies being shoved up his nose, making him sick. All of the animatronics were keeping their gazes firmly away from the pit, trying to ignore the horrifying display. Gregory quickly began to do the same. In parts and services, there were no flashy neon lights, no posters displaying the different characters. It struck Gregory as unnatural to see a place so dull in the Pizzaplex. Even though the mall's displays had all been muted by the night, every color of the rainbow had still tried to peek through. Now, though, it had given up. It looked like if they left the platform, all of the color in their bodies would be sucked out as well. DJ held Moon out to Freddy, the others gathering around to watch. Freddy was as gentle as possible while taking the slender animatronic out of DJ's hands, careful not to break him further as he set off down the hall. Monty followed Freddy as he approached one of the safe-like doors labeled Sun/Moon Puppet. Monty began to work on the heavy locking mechanisms, tapping in passcodes and cranking the wheel. Moon's arm hung down limply, his wires and hooks squeaking harshly against the ground when Freddy moved. After being chased through the daycare by Moon, it was strange to see him like this. He was just a sleeping robot, being carried by Freddy like a baby, rather than a paranoid hunter bent on catching him. An emotion he hadn't been expecting came to him. Guilt. Before he could be brought further into the odd perspective, Gregory's attention was grabbed as Freddy leaned out of Moon's maintenance room and signed something to DJ. DJ shook his head, 2 low notes chiming out. DJ says he doesn't need repairs. He's going to stay here while we get fixed up, Freddy explained to Gregory. It was then when Gregory registered that the first room that they were in was also doubling as DJ's maintenance area. It didn't look like the rest of the parts and services was wide enough for him to follow, and sure enough, DJ was settling down on the floor, white eyes drooping sleepily. Gregory peered down the corridor. On the far wall, all the way at the back, was 2 doors. One was a simple elevator. The other door, however, was heavily locked. It looked to be the same build that the maintenance rooms had, solid and unmoving. Above it was a label, Animatronic Rooms. He remembered the other set of stairs that he had seen, back in the hall where the band's rooms had been. It was the same door that he had attempted to escape through while trying to ditch Freddy. It felt weird to acknowledge that they had come full circle like this. Whoa, how come he gets this many parts? The exclamation took Gregory back to reality. He peeked into the room labeled Sun/Moon Puppet, hovering at the entrance as Freddy went back inside. The lights clicked on for them, flickering dully across the small room. Dead moths speckled the inner side of the lights, the walls stained with rust. A leaned-back chair was set in the middle of the room beneath the lights, reminding him of the dentist. This place had a similar setup to DJ's, but smaller. The tools hung out on the racks were moon-sized, drills, wrenches, screwdrivers, as well as mechanisms that he didn't have a name for. Several boxes filled up the walls, full of new sets of every one of both Sun and Moon's parts. There were parts of endoskeletons, limbs, feet, hands, face. There were even boxes full of little golden bells for the red ribbons tied around his wrists. Several strips of scarlet and tangerine clothing hung from the wall, ready to dress at least 3 different versions of them, the dark indigo shades of Moon held on the other side of the fabric. Okay, why would you need this many left arms? Monty said, pointing to a tub close to him. Sure enough, there was copious amounts of left arms piled there, waiting. Don't be rude, Freddy scolded, setting Moon gently down on the small chair. He gets damaged a lot more often than we do. He never asked for more parts. Lucky, Roxy grumbled, listening in from outside. They left Moon to go get Chica and Roxy next. Freddy helped Chica up, saying, Okay, I don't know how many parts have been pre-ordered, but we'll do our best, all right? She nodded weakly. Gregory watched them curiously as the four of them moved each other around. Monty led Roxy to the door labeled with her name, while Freddy helped Chica duck into her room. Freddy set Chica down gently onto her maintenance room's stiff chair, raising it up a bit with the button on the floor. "Just rest here until we finish with Moon," he told her. "I don't know how long it'll be." Chica nodded, gesturing for them to go, leaning back with another empty sigh. They left, meeting Monty in the hall, the three of them converging into Moon's room. "We need to find a manual," Freddy said. "I'm pretty sure that there's some stored here for new employees." Freddy moved to one of the drawers, beginning to open and close different cabinets until he found the right one. He started to flip through the pages, his smile fading into a confused frown. It's blank," he said. "Really?" Monty said, taking it and looking at it, leaning back with a glare. "Wow, great." Gregory approached, reaching for it to see himself. Freddy handed it to him, letting Gregory flip through the pages. There were intricate instructions over every procedure, filling up each section with diagrams. "It's not blank," Gregory piped up, showing it to them. "Look." Monty peered at it. It looks pretty blank to me." Gregory checked the pages that he was showing them. There was almost no white space on the page, the whole thing filled up with notes about replacing joints and endoskeletons. "You can't see this?" Gregory asked, pointing. "Is there something written there?" Freddy asked. "Yes." "Is it written in white ink?" Freddy asked. "No, it's..." Gregory looked back to it, confusion swirling through him. Maybe we're programmed not to see it," Freddy suggested. "This happens sometimes." "Why wouldn't they want you to see this?" Gregory asked. Freddy shrugged. "I don't know. Our programs blank out a lot of things to us. We never really know why." Freddy was now squinting at him, a visible idea forming in his expression. Gregory grew more and more afraid as he realized what this meant. "Gregory, I think you're the only one who can repair us," Freddy said slowly. "Do you think you can do this?" "No!" Gregory said immediately, backing up. "No way! This is crazy! I'm not getting anywhere near his wires!" Freddy lowered his head, glancing back at Moon's hooks. "I'm sorry, but we can't see the instructions," Freddy said gently. "We don't know what parts to look for or what to do with them. And even if we did, our fingers are too big to work on each other. You're the only one who can do this for us." "Besides, it was kinda your fault that..." Monty began, before snapping his mouth shut, curling his tail close and messing with the end of it. "Sorry." Gregory wanted to shout denial after denial, but something stopped him. He recalled the image of Chica's broken shell, of Roxy's melted face. Shame sank deeper and deeper into him, forming a bitter resolve. He had done this to them. He had to fix it. Hating every syllable, Gregory eventually sighed, giving in. "Fine, but you're gonna have to stay with me, all right?" Freddy nodded, putting his paw on his back as he moved to stand beside him. "Of course, I'll be right here the whole time." Preparing himself for the incoming nightmare fuel, Gregory flipped back to the front of the manual, tilting to read it in the low light. The table of contents was filled with the names of hundreds of different procedures. How to replace shells, how to fix facial tears, how to reattach limbs. He found a section about back injuries, then a part about damage to the spine, and followed the page number. At the very beginning of the instructions was a very large red message taking up half the page. "Warning. At no point should you ever open the chest cavity. If you feel it is necessary for a procedure, or if an animatronic has breakages in their chest cavity, alert authorized personnel immediately. Tampering with the chest cavity will result in severe punishment." Gregory read over the warning, a bit confused. Still, he chalked it up to something that a technician would understand, moving on to the first step. Step 1. Find the small panel on the back of its head and open it up. There is a small red switch there. Turn it to the off position. This will paralyze and numb the animatronic so it is ready for the procedure. Below that, in parentheses, read, if the switch is broken and won't turn off, place an order for a paralysis/numbing mechanism replacement. Restrain the animatronic with the designated straps on the chair, use the company-issued earplugs, and perform the rest of the procedure as quickly as possible. Gregory blinked a few times, rereading it again and again, beginning to feel ill. What? He glanced to the page before that, then flipped through several more. Every procedure had the same first step preceding it. He was distracted when Freddy took Moon's head and rotated it 180 degrees so his face was down. For a good few seconds, Gregory thought that he had killed Moon, but soon recognized that it was normal for his neck to be able to bend at that angle. Gregory approached, looking down at the back of Moon's head with growing uncertainty, finding the panel that they had mentioned. And while he was this close, he noticed something else. There was a tight ring of black metal around Moon's neck. At the initial realization, he thought it was just a part of him, continuing on like normal without giving it much thought. The panel was there, just as the instructions said. He poked the space to test it, then picked it open. The tiny red switch looked a bit lopsided, but as he pulled at it, it clanked into the off position. Moon's shivering fell still immediately. Paralyzed. Freddy helped to get Moon's shirt off, something that was much less uncomfortable than Gregory initially thought, since he was just a robot made of metal and plastic. Gregory noticed something odd about his outfit as they unclipped the points that the clothing attached to his torso. His puffy sleeves didn't come off with the middle of it. At first glance, the sleeves and the rest of the shirt seemed to be part of just one outfit, but apparently they were separated into 3 individual parts: the left arm, the torso, and the right arm. Gregory reasoned that this was probably because of the nature of the transformation, where him and Son changed what they wore by flipping the fabric inside out. Separating the cloth on his arms from the cloth on his torso seemed to make room for that feature to flip over without getting impossibly tangled up where things would have normally overlapped. Freddy picked Moon up and lied him down onto his stomach, so the damage on his back was exposed. The plating around his shoulders was dented in, a crack forming down the spine, a few frayed wires poking out beneath. Freddy visibly shuddered when he saw that. Okay, bye, Monty said abruptly, rapidly leaving the room, looking a bit sickened. Freddy stared after him, seeming to want to leave as well, but instead stayed behind with Gregory, putting a hand on his shoulder. I'm sure you can do this, Freddy told him. Just be careful. Gregory nodded, swallowing. Every part of him wanted to stay away from Moon, tensed and ready for him to leap up and strangle him, no matter how impossible the idea was. Gregory forced himself to read the next step. Step 2. Remove the panel on the back. Removing the entire rest of the torso shell is unnecessary. Use a matching screwdriver to disconnect the chips along the seams on the sides of the torso, as shown. Sun and Moon's torso was drawn beside it, both from the side and the back angles. Red arrows pointed to several parts along the outside of his back, beneath his armpits where his ribs would have been. Gregory searched in the cabinets and found the right screwdriver, approaching Moon's body, knuckles white over the handle of it. He found the different clips around his torso, zeroing in on the first one, the one on the left behind his arm. He tried to pry it away, pushing harder. With a click, it snapped off, the 2 broken sides of it now exposed. Nothing happened after that. He kept on going around the edge of his back, getting a little faster with each one. Several were hidden beneath the fluff of his outer casing, but he was able to get to all of them, making his way around his stomach and back up to the top of his shoulders. With each one broken, another hunk of tiny metal and plastic fell off and clinked onto the table, a few skipping down to the floor. The procedure was gradually breaking down the things holding his shell together, and judging by the tightness in Freddy's hand, it was not the most comforting thing for another robot to witness. He got to the last one, picking at it. Gregory yelped, jumping back at the sudden noise. Freddy had pulled him away, but they both saw with a fluttering of relief that nothing had happened. Moon's back panel was fully released, ready to be removed. Gregory leaned in and peeled the dented panel away to look inside. What he saw mostly just registered as a tangled mess. His chest cavity was the only thing solid, covered in overlapping wires, pistons, and gears. A spine-like structure was cut down the middle of it, now bent at the middle in a zigzag. Freddy's grip dug into his arm as Gregory set the back of his torso aside. He glanced up, spotting Freddy looking away, appearing quite disturbed with drooping ears and a tight jaw. "Sorry, you don't have to watch," Gregory began. "No, it's fine," Freddy said, still not looking down. "I want to be here for you." So he moved on to the next step. Step 3. Clip all damaged parts wiring to the nearest pinch point. This will clear the way for new wires without needing to replace larger parts. Refer to the diagram to keep track of all damaged or missing parts. Beside it was the blueprint for the inside of Sun and Moon's entire body, showing all of the inner workings, giving names and meanings to the things that they were able to see now. It was almost fascinating, seeing the parts where their clothing was reeled into his legs and flipped in an S shape to show the other side of the fabric. It was finally able to make sense of something that he had marveled at hours ago. Gregory looked back to the real thing, growing nervous again. His spine was lined with pistons and circuits, many jagged dents messing up the points where the wires connected, causing several to fray. In the manual's blueprint, a matching panel was shown, leading down the spine from the processor and the head that took care of motor functions. The pinch points were all labeled in red ink, appearing as square parts covering the wires every few inches. Gregory looked back to Moon's real spine, finding the same quote-unquote pinch points there. It took a bit of back and forth, but he eventually understood that he was supposed to cut off all the broken things with the pinch points, so he could connect new things in their place. Gregory poked around, finding out what things were broken and which things weren't, getting a pair of pliers, hovering them above the delicate parts, hesitating. His hands trembled worse the more he tried to keep them still. "Freddy," he began, "what happens if I mess up?" "You won't mess up," Freddy tried to encourage, still not looking. "I'm sure you'll be able to do this. He's paralyzed anyway. He shouldn't be able to feel a thing, so just stay calm and be slow, okay? I'm going to stay here with you the whole time." "Okay, alright." Gregory shook himself out, trying to banish the squirming in his belly. Freaking out would just make him mess up even more. Aiming carefully, Gregory poked at the broken wires to test them, taking a deep breath and popping the first pinch point open. Inside the small rectangle, the copper parts of the wires were straightened out together, with no rubber attached, all in their own lanes before splitting back outside. His hands were still shaking. Gregory closed his eyes, wishing that he was anywhere else right now. He tried to draw strength from Freddy's presence, opening his eyes and beginning to clip the wires. 1 wire, 2, 3. On the 4th, Moon jerked. Gregory snatched his hands back. "He's not supposed to move!" he squeaked, looking back up to Freddy, who also appeared alarmed. Freddy shook his head, trying to smile convincingly. "This doesn't usually happen, but I think I know what's going on. Usually the technicians input a code that shuts our systems down and interrupts the flow of our battery's energy. Moon can't choose to move, but he still has a charge, I think, and if you're working on his motor functions, maybe a stray signal could..." Freddy quickly stopped that line of thinking, covering it up with, "But that doesn't mean that he'll hurt you. The technicians forget to input the code all the time, and they've all been fine before. They said that the code is just a safety precaution anyway, so..." Gregory hated how uncertain he seemed, feeling like that he would fall apart. Looking back to the wires, he didn't want to go on. "You're gonna be okay," Freddy told him, words hollow now. "It's not like he can jump up and grab you. Employees do this safely all the time." Employees know what they're doing, Gregory thought to himself. He took a moment to collect himself, and then continued. He clipped the next wire. Nothing. He kept on clipping another. Eventually, he got to the last. Another jerk. Gregory reeled back. Freddy grabbed him. They watched. Moon didn't move again. "Okay," Freddy breathed. "You're okay, see? Just just little twitches. Gregory nodded, approaching again, nails slicing up into his heels. He moved on to the other end of the injury, in his lower back this time. He opened the pinch point and started again. He clipped the first, the second, the third. On the fourth, still nothing happened. Maybe that was the end of... Moon's hooks scraped against each other. Gregory leaped back, terror bursting through him, trying to get away. He was hidden behind Freddy before even registering what had actually happened, holding onto him so tight a few strands of fur were pulled out. He stared, stunned, at Moon. Nothing important had changed. Gregory hated this. He wanted to just give up and lie down. He looked back up to Freddy, who repeated, "You're okay, just another little twitch." He went back in. He clipped the fourth to last, the third to last, the second to last. He stopped at the end. He braced for it, clipping the final one. Nothing. He let out a breath, lightheaded. To finish the step, Gregory readied himself, taking hold of the broken parts that he had disconnected with the clippers. He got a good hold of it and lifted it up into the air, the separated rectangular parts swinging delicately, harmless. Freddy made a weird sound, closing his eyes. Gregory put the damaged piece out onto a tray beside the table, covering it up with a nearby rag to put it out of sight. He checked back on the manual. Step 4. Take new parts and use the splicing tool to splice the new wires into the according pinch points wires. Gregory moved back to the drawers. They were all labeled, so after figuring out what the new part was called, some sort of really long word that he couldn't pronounce, he narrowed it down with the first few letters and found the right square wire thingy. After comparing it to the picture to make sure that it was the correct one, he took it out and returned to Moon, going back to another word that he didn't recognize. What's a splicking tool? Gregory asked. Pardon? This thing. He stopped, then realized that he couldn't show Freddy the page. He spelled it out instead. S-P-L-I-C-I-N-G. Oh, a splicing tool, Freddy corrected. There's probably one here. He searched around the tool-lined walls, eventually finding what he was looking for, returning with something that looked kind of like a gray electric toothbrush with a weird stapler at the end rather than bristles. Okay, Gregory, Freddy said, shifting back a bit. This is a kind of dangerous part. Fear spread all the way up to the tips of his fingers, eyeing the toothbrush stapler thing. Freddy pressed something on the side. It clicked the box thingy together, something lighting up inside of it that extinguished the moment that he let go. This is a splicing tool, Freddy explained. It's going to make a small flame that you can use to melt the copper back together. Just be very careful not to burn yourself, or to melt anything that's not the wire. Gregory took the mechanism, pressing the same locked button. The box thingy clicked, the same light appearing and disappearing. He looked back to the instructions, recognizing the section that was labeled for replacing the part. He had to match the two wire ends together in the pinch points, or Moon wouldn't work right. Gregory laid the new part down, taking the toothbrush stapler splicing tool, and turned it on the pinch points wires. Each had their own lane, separating it from the others. He took the first wire, threading it through the pinch points wire, putting the boxy bit of the splicing tool to it. Readying himself, the spark came. He immediately stopped it. Nothing had happened. Gregory did it again, trying to grow confidence. When he lifted the tool away, the copper bits were stuck together. Gregory closed off that wire, moving on to the next one, doing the same. He sparked, it strung together. He closed it up. On the third one, there was another jerk from Moon. Gregory nearly dropped the tool, jumping back behind Freddy. They stared at Moon's still figure. Neither of them said anything. He just took deep breaths and continued. He got through the first side without any more incidents, closing up the pinch point and moving down to the one on his neck. He lined up the wires, splicing it again. Nothing. He did the first wire, the second, the third. The hooks moved. Gregory leaped back, just like before, fear flooding up from his guts into his throat. The hooks had moved, scraped against each other. That noise, that horrible noise. It was just for a moment, but it was enough to frighten him. He closed his eyes when he saw nothing had really gone wrong, leaning against Freddy as the bear gave him a quick hug. He returned. Did the next few wires. Nothing. He came onto the last one. His hands were trembling, the tip of the splicing tool not lining up. Gregory tried to tighten his grip, trying to focus, but it just made it worse. Just as his eyes began to sting, Freddy took his shoulder again, saying, Hey, it's okay. You're doing great. Just one more. Gregory nodded, swallowing and blinking rapidly. He gathered himself, splicing the last one. He waited. Nothing. He released his breath, closing up the pinch point. Step 5. Reattach the back's panel at the points shown below. The same clips as before were circled. Gregory took the panel that he had peeled away and set it back in position, finding a drawer full of new clips and a screwdriver. He clicked through each of the clips on his side like before, this time squeezing a new part into place instead of just breaking one off. The torso jolted. He jumped back, hands off. The shell had clanked into place. The next step read, Step 6. Remove the shell of the head and check for breakages in the upper spine's wiring. Use a matching screwdriver to disconnect the clips along the outside of the face, as shown. If there are no breakages, reattach the head shell and continue. The diagram beside it showed both Sun and Moon's face, the different parts labeled in endless lists along each side. It had the same explanations for how the transformation happened, something that distracted Gregory for a little bit. Their circular half-face rotated behind a crescent plate to show either Moon's dark half or Sun's full circle, the sunbeams folded up inside of his head. There were even the endoskeletons for his nightcap's limb, coiled up behind his head with the fabric that was wrapped around Sun's neck to hide while Moon wasn't there. Seeing it all laid out here made it look much less ridiculous than it seemed initially. Gregory got the screwdriver again and found the clips that it was pointing out to him. He began to disconnect them, struggling a bit to get a few below the white wool of his nightcap, making it around his jaw back up to the top of his head. When the last clip came loose, Moon's face clanked loudly towards him, making Gregory yelp. Freddy grabbed him back before they realized that the shell had only released, ready to be removed. Gregory found leverage with the end of the screwdriver and pried the face right off. Freddy only didn't make a noise because his eyes were already shut. The dozens of tiny facial plates were exposed now, the ones that worked beneath the rubbery coating to make a diverse range of expressions, the spindly bits suspended from thin wires that lifted from the back of his head. Moon's eyes were now staring right through Gregory, a glassy film to them. There was a small engine-like thing behind the eyes, one that, after several checks by comparing the picture to the real thing, wasn't damaged enough to be replaced. So, Gregory reattached the face with all the new clips, checking the last step, hope growing. Step 7. Unparalyze the animatronic with the switch at the back of the head. Do not leave the room until the animatronic is fully online. Under that, in parentheses, was, if, for any reason, the animatronic was not able to be paralyzed/numbed during the procedure and required restraints, do not release the restraints. Leave the room immediately and allow the guards to handle the animatronic until it is stable enough to be freed. That's it! Done! Gregory said, smiling up at Freddy, quivering with relief. Oh, great job, superstar! He said, giving him a beaming hug. See? That wasn't so bad. Gregory found the switch again, clicking it on. Moon didn't get up immediately as he expected. The longer he lied there, the longer worry grew. Is he okay? Gregory asked. Did I break him? No, it takes a while for the paralysis to wear off, Freddy explained. He has to practice moving again. He'll be waking up in a little while. Gregory gladly put the slicing tool aside, clenching and unclenching his fingers to loosen up the tension that had built up between his knuckles. Freddy took on the job of wrangling the shirt back onto Moon, having a little trouble with the tiny clips, but eventually managing to do it correctly. However, before they wrapped up, Freddy halted, peering down at Moon. Seeming to decide on something, Freddy turned and started to dig through the drawers full of tools, picking up several and putting them back down after weighing them. What are you doing? Gregory asked. Well, if we're gonna go against Vanessa, we have to get the collars off, Freddie explained simply. Collars? Gregory echoed, looking back down to the black ring that he had noticed before, the one around Moon's thin neck. It was where the big bell on Sun's chest had been hung from. Now, that bell was at the bottom of Moon's nightcap, leaving an empty crescent space in front of the collar. She's a security guard. She'll be equipped with a remote, Freddie explained casually. What do the collars do? Gregory asked slowly. Well, they can give us a controlled shock, Freddie said. Why would they shock you? Gregory squeaked. If we're hurting someone, Freddie explained, picking up a huge clipper-like tool and tilting it around to examine it in the light. It's a safety precaution. How often do you hurt people? Gregory stammered, the old mistrust returning. We've never hurt anyone, actually. Well, besides criminals who try to sneak in at night, but we only apprehend those, Freddie shrugged. Moon did give a child quite a scare a while ago, but usually the collars just motivate us. He added quickly, as if that justified it. Don't worry, they don't shock us while we're around customers. A sudden outrage poured over the suspicion, something deep inside of him wanting to start yelling. But he tried to keep it down. The person who made this decision wasn't here right now. He didn't want to upset Freddie more than he already had. He decided just to save this information for later, watching as Freddie decided on what he would use. The thing that he had in his hands looked like a vicious set of loppers, which he then held to Moon's throat. The tool looked big enough to snap Moon's head right off, and Freddie was being careful because of that, pinching at the collar's ends to loosen it. Eventually, once he got the tips beneath it, he was able to squeeze the big lopper until the ring of black metal popped off, the collar falling with a clatter. There, Freddie sighed, removing it with a nervous flick to his ears. Hope we don't get in too much trouble for this. Gregory was taking a second look at Freddie's neck now. At first, he thought that the collar might have been the gold chains, but quickly narrowed it down to the bow tie. It was a navy blue color, set tight and neat in a band around his neck, inconspicuous. If Freddie hadn't mentioned it, Gregory would have never guessed it was a shock collar. Do you need me to... Gregory began. No, I think I can do it, Freddie said, putting the huge loppers to his own throat. The metal is far too thick for you to be able to break. Before he started, he added, Gregory, don't do this at home. I know, Gregory snorted, stepping back. Like with Moon's, Freddie tried to work the jagged end of the clipper beneath the band to get some sort of leverage first. He took a much longer time to remove it, and for a while, Gregory thought that he was about to watch Freddie accidentally decapitate himself. Eventually, with one last clank, the collar snapped off and fell to the floor, a much heavier clank coming from it, making Moon's collar only pale in comparison. Monty was peering curiously into the room, probably having noticed the conversation, taking the lopper-looking tool whenever Freddie offered it to him. He, too, had a small ring of metal on his long neck. It had looked, at first, like just another accessory that was only made of leather with studded gold decorations. But Monty was now working away at it, making it clear what its functions were. There was a loud clatter as the horrible thing came off, the leather outer coating not matching the heavy metallic thud that it made on the floor. "Ha ha! Take that!" Monty said triumphantly, kicking at the bit of scrap. "Today's been a good day. It was all worth it, guys!" All of them had those? Gregory tried to think back, but he hadn't really paid much attention to their decorations. As he contemplated that, Freddie passed him, Moon in his arms, stepping out into the hall. "All right," he said. "We should do Chica next." Freddie returned to DJ, passing Moon to his gloved hands instead. Freddie signed something in ASL, and DJ nodded, a quick blip of notes confirming that he understood. "Did I do it right?" Gregory asked, still watching the limp animatronic as DJ settled down with him. "Of course, he's gonna be all right," Freddie reassured. "We have to go do the others now." He was still pretty confused that he felt so guilty about this. He didn't like Moon, not even one little bit. He was creepy and delusional and literally tried to gut him over nothing. But still, Moon had gotten hurt while trying to save his life. "Can he hear me?" Gregory asked. Freddy nodded. Yes, he should be able to. Getting close enough, Gregory pointed at the slackened half-gold and half-dark face, saying to him, "Thank you, and you're welcome. I guess we're even now." A commotion quickly turned their attention back to the others. "You can't be serious," Roxy was saying from the other room, sounding more afraid than mad at this point. "Why wouldn't they have spare eyes?" "I guess 'cause they're a sense-in part thingy," Monty said apologetically, rummaging through the boxes of parts. "Eyes are apparently the most expensive thing we have in our entire bodies. Sorry." "This can't be happening," Roxy groaned, raising her voice. "Hey, Gregory! Wherever you are, you're a little twerp!" "Sorry, Foxface, but that's on you," Gregory said. "You tried to kill me." "Yeah, I know," Roxy sighed begrudgingly, "but you're still a twerp!" "Oh, we have legs, though," Monty called. "Freddy! Roxy has a lot of legs if Chica needs one!" He held one up, then squinted doubtfully at it. It was about half as short and 3 times less thick. Actually, it might not hold her weight, but... Monty interrupted himself, lowering his head with a quick, "Sorry," and falling silent again. "We can still use its endoskeleton. It'll be better than nothing," Freddy piped up from across the hall. "Bring one over here, please." Gregory kept carefully out of the way as the animatronics exchanged parts. DJ watched from the entrance of the hall, still cradling Moon close, making little strings of notes that sounded almost like a lullaby. "Okay, Gregory, we need you over here again," Freddy called, leaning out of Chica's maintenance room. Gregory swallowed reluctantly, ducking his head. He left Moon, hurrying to the room that he had been summoned to, dread returning just as bad as before. He approached her, ankles tight as he leaned over her, keeping his fingers close to his chest. Chica was lying on the horizontal chair, while Freddy put Roxy's spare leg on the floor beside another strange part that looked like a tiny engine. Her feathery pink arm warmers and boa were all taken off separately, all ruined with stains and smears. Instead, new versions of the accessories were ready, having come from a pile beside a washing machine and dryer outside. The brief glimpse of emotion that he had seen before came back. Guilt. His guts squirmed at the sight of her, fresh waves of shame making the air rise to an uncomfortable temperature. He had done this. He had done this to one of Freddy's closest friends. And it had felt so good when it happened. Like he was strong, like he was getting revenge. He had wanted nothing more than to hurt the world back for once, to just have one moment where he was allowed to be angry when people were bad to him. It was what his mother did, of course. If she got to do that, why couldn't he? Gregory could understand that the feeling of triumph whenever he shattered her was wrong. It was bad. Freddy had been so upset. Was hurting Chica the wrong thing to do? Gregory had no time to really process those thoughts. It was time to fix his violent act. Think of it as punishment. Freddy was already working to clip off Chica's collar. Hers had several seashell pink feathers trailing down from it, disguising it as just another accessory. Gregory heard it break off and clatter to the floor behind him as he searched for the manual. When Gregory found it, he held it out to Freddy hopefully, saying, Can you still not see this?" Freddy peered down at it, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, Gregory. It's likely that none of us can see each other's instructions." Even though he had expected that, disappointment still sank deeply inside of him. He looked back to Chica, saying, "We have to replace the endoskeleton of her injured leg. The rest of it just looks like shell wounds, but her beak and voice box." He shifted uncomfortably, saying, "Let's do that last." He moved down to her damaged foot first, realizing with a bit of confusion that not everything was cracked. She had fractures in the shells of all 4 limbs, even her head, but not her torso. That part appeared stronger. Gregory found the page for her left leg. The first step was the same instructions to paralyze her, which it seemed Freddy had already done whenever he entered the room. Step 2. Remove the shell of the limb. Use a matching screwdriver to disconnect the clips along the middle seam of the limb, as shown. Beside it was a diagram of the leg, the clips circled in red ink. Gregory did what he did with Moon's face, going around the outside edges and undoing the various clips. He braced at the last one, the expected pop of the shell detaching, almost not scaring him this time. He took off the front and back of the leg, exposing the endoskeleton, which Freddy pointedly turned away from. It was made of pistons, metal supports, rows of colorful wiring, and reinforced bolts. Step 3. Clip all damaged parts wiring from the nearest pinch point. This will clear the way for new wires without needing to replace larger parts. Refer to the diagram to keep track of all damaged or missing parts. He found the wires behind her knee, opening up the pinch points, getting the clippers again and bracing himself. He broke the first one. Nothing. He broke the second, third, then readjusted, going for the fourth. The jerk came, this time a twitch of her foot. He still jumped at it, trying to calm himself. It was nothing. He was doing okay. Sweat had soaked his underarms by the time that he disconnected the last wire, returning to the instructions. Step 4. Open the joint of the knee with the uncapping tool and open the joint's casing as shown. Slowly remove the endoskeleton from the joint. Gregory found the uncapping tool, something that looked 10 times more horrifying than he had imagined. He only located it because the drawer was labeled, standing back as he took it in. It looked like one of those mechanical servos in a claw machine full of toys, with a wicked hook in the middle. He struggled to lift it, the thing heavy and swinging its weight back and forth as he wobbled over to the right spot. Gregory started to understand what it meant as he got down to her knee. It was tightly knitted together with several layers of wiring and tubes that led to various pistons, the shin meeting the rest of her knee with a round tip and a clamp. Referencing the pictures, Gregory pushed the claw over the joint, tightening it to the right position so it wouldn't move. With the press of a button, a snapping noise cracked out, one that was loud enough for him to think that he had broken her. Freddy visibly shuddered as Gregory suppressed the urge to tell him that he thought he might have done something wrong. He checked again and again, making absolutely sure that he was doing it right. Worst part was, the instructions said to do that 2 more times. Gregory readjusted, working the claw around into the position that it said. The same ka-chunk was heard, Freddy making another small noise, eyes firmly pressed shut. On the third crunch, he was able to lift the claw away, the broken joint's casing now taken off in several segmented places to be discarded, viciously cut off from the pistons and wires and supports. However, he hadn't read ahead far enough, and the moment that the joint was gone, most of her legs started to fall off. Gregory yelped as the broken leg fell and clattered to the floor, making quite a racket. "What is it?" Freddy stammered, still not looking. "Is she okay?" Yes, she's okay," Gregory reassured, deciding not to narrate what was going on. He quietly took the broken tool and set it aside, continuing in the next step. Step 5. Take the endoskeleton of the new limb and the new joint and connect it back into place as shown. Once the joint is secure, close it up at the connection points shown below. He examined the picture, then looked over to the Roxy leg that they had. He found the extra parts for a new knee, then crouched down to the Roxy leg. He found the same clips around her shell like before, taking the shell off and picking the endoskeleton back up to line it up with Chica's leg, knee in the other hand. Monty was right, it was smaller than the original part, but it was all that they had, so it would have to do. He clicked the joint into place, carefully pushing the ends of the knee into it. It didn't quite click together in the same way, but even though it was loose, he went on anyway. He closed up the joint with another clank, settling his nerves as he returned to the manual. Step 6. Take new parts and use the splicing tool to splice the new wires into the according pinch points wires. Gregory fetched the splicing tool again, nervousness curdling up as he opened the pinch points, lining up the wires. He laid down the first wire, threading it through, holding his breath and aligning it with the splicing tool. He set off the spark. Nothing yet. He closed the first one, going on to the next. And then Gregory was kicked in the face. He cried out, tumbling back several steps, accidentally dropping the splicing tool. "Gregory! Are you okay?" Freddy gasped, holding on to him. He had accidentally opened his eyes at the sudden noise, catching a glimpse of Chica's exposed endoskeleton and making a startled, choking noise, eyes snapping closed again. Gregory rubbed at his heated nose with one hand, eyes stinging, heart racing. It was bleeding for the 100th time tonight. Sorry, she kicked me, it's fine. Gregory shuddered, forcing his hands away from his face and blinking fast, picking up the tool again and checking it over. It looked fine, so he returned to the leg, this time staying out of her range. He did the next wire, the next. On the final one, he readied himself. Don't jump. Don't jump. He sparked it. Nothing happened. He let out a sigh, turning back to the manual. Step 5. Reattach shell of... Gregory outright screamed, nearly falling over, Freddy holding him back again. They both stared at the leg, breathing hard. She had jammed her heel into the chair below her. I am going to die here, Gregory sighed long and loud, snatching the manual up and shoving his nose back into it. I'm gonna die of a heart attack right here, right now, and it's gonna be because of Chica. Step 5. Reattach shell of leg at the points shown below. He looked around, finding the tubs full of her different shells. There was one for every part, so after a bit of comparing, he found the left legs. Freddy carried the heavy thing up to the table, wincing as he lined up the new shell back to the leg. It didn't fit quite the same, but Gregory clipped it all on anyway, still keeping his distance. Once the foot was fixed, he let himself relax a bit. Just a few more easy things to go through before the hardest part. Replacing the shells of her arms and her other foot was easy. No creepy involuntary kicking, just taking the damaged shell off and clipping new shells on. The endoskeleton didn't look messed up for any of the other limbs, luckily. In the middle of that, they began to hear sounds from outside the hall, where DJ was keeping watch over Moon. There was a strangled groaning noise, followed by a glitching struggle as two different voices tried to play over each other.
Please, let me up. Don't hurt him. Don't hurt him, please. Please don't hurt him.
No! Moons managed to overpower his brothers, calling out, "Go back to sleep, we're okay, I'm not hurting him!" DJ played a few notes, and after a bit of shuffling, Moon sighed in relief, staying in control. Gregory leaned out into the hall, curious of what was going on. The lights in parts and services weren't considered bright, but it certainly wasn't dark enough to pass for nighttime. DJ was gently rubbing Moon's back with a thumb, trying to calm him down. Moon was covering his face, keeping his eyes closed. Blocking out the lights, Gregory realized. Please, just rest, Moon was muttering to himself. I'll take care of it, you need to rest. Gregory would have argued that he would rather have Sun out right now, but he held himself back, ashamed of that train of thought. Sun obviously wasn't well enough. He returned to Chica, proud that he was now most of the way done. Chica almost looked normal. And then, just as Gregory was beginning to smile, he finished the last shelled limb and made it up to Chica's face. All right, we're almost done with her, Freddy said nervously. She just needs a new voice box. He leaned down, picking up one of the parts that he had already gathered. It looked like a silvery engine, no larger than the palm of his hand. This is actually one of my voice boxes, he explained. Those are the most common things that I need to have replaced. But it can still function as Chica's. Wait, will she sound like you now? That would be weird, Gregory asked, trying to laugh off some of the uneasiness. I don't think so, Freddy said. It'll be getting instruction codes from her processor, not mine. We all have individual voice codes to make us sound different. He shrugged, but I guess we'll see. He looked to the manual, flipping around through it. Near the back was the instructions for voice box repair. The first step was another repeat of telling him to paralyze her, and the second had the same instructions as Moon to remove the head shell. He went around the edge of her face, clipping the shell off bit by bit. Don't look, he warned. Freddy closed his eyes as the last one popped, releasing the plates. He pried away the head's shell, setting it aside. Chica's insides looked a bit different from Moon's. She had way less moving parts, and everything was much larger to fit her. Her eyes were set on socket stands, wires stabbing out in a splayed position to where her faceplate usually was, the lump of protected pistons behind her eyes in a crumpled cube. He did a double take. There was something between her eyes. It looked like a small white box held there on a stand that didn't match the dark gray of the rest of her endoskeleton. Something about it was wrong. He didn't know exactly why, but he could feel it, like it was whispering to him with words that he couldn't hear, radiating an unnatural presence, disrupting the harmony of the finely tuned animatronics features. Moon didn't have that. He would have noticed. Gregory looked back to the diagram of Chica's face. There was no white box listed. He flipped through a few more pages of the instructions, but still found no mention of a white box. Curiosity and fear came, both equally strong. He gingerly tapped the box, then hooked his nails around the clasp holding it closed. He popped it open, peering inside to get a good look. Gregory screamed. He took in a breath, then screamed again, even louder, the noise strangling itself into a sob. He staggered back several steps, covering his mouth, trying not to throw up. Freddy hugged him close once he saw it, repeating, you're okay, Gregory, don't look." It was too late. The image had been burned too deeply into his mind. What is it?" Monty's voice came from out in the hall. "What happened?" It's... Freddy stammered breathlessly. It's a severed tongue." Freddy removed it as fast as possible. After a minute or two of trying to banish the nausea crawling up from out of his belly, Gregory was able to control himself. He only opened his eyes again when Freddy reassured him that it was gone. He was still so shaken by the image, he forgot what he had even been doing. 1,000 questions ran through his head. When? How? Who? Why? Gregory returned his attention to the manual, trying to just move on as fast as possible. Step 3. Open up the throat's shell by prying it open on the points shown below. He did as it said with shaking hands, the metal sliding out of the way as it was made to do. Just keep going, keep going. Inside of her throat, there was a rectangular clump of things that looked like a small engine. The 2 parts of it, where the wires used to be, was now torn out by the force of her beak being removed, lodging it sideways. His stomach contracted again, the image of the tongue violently returning to the forefront of his mind. It had been fresh, no decay or rot or... He swallowed down bile, a tremor racking his body. Just keep repairing her. Don't think about it. Don't. Step 4. Disconnect damaged parts from the nearest pinch point and remove the damaged pieces. It took a bit of poking around, but he was eventually able to find the wires, going at them with the clippers. He did the first, second, third. He started bracing for it. But he disconnected every wire without problems, eventually able to pick the voice box out, setting it aside as Freddy kept his eyes away. It had been so small, dry and swollen and... No, stop thinking about it, keep going. He forced himself to read the next step. Step 5. Take new parts and use the splicing tool to splice the new wires into the according pinch points wires. As he began to line the new voice box up, he leaned away, preparing himself as he got the splicing tools ready. He spliced the first one. Nothing yet. He spliced the second, braced for the third. Nothing still. Maybe nothing would happen. Her voice box wasn't supposed to move. He spliced the next. The next.
Hello.
He jerked back with a yell, unable to stop it. Chica had spoken. He looked at her eyes. They were still frozen and glassy. He soon realized what had happened, suppressing the shivers, leaning back in. He spliced the next. The next.
Hello.
He jumped less that time, growing frustrated. The rest of the way through, she didn't make a peep. He closed her up, rubbing his slick forehead, beginning to reconnect the links over her throat.
Gregory!
He jerked back. The inside of his cheek started bleeding. He glanced back to Freddy, who was still looking freaked out enough to worry him. Gregory swallowed, grimacing at the taste, continuing to seal the throat up, backing up once the last sheath of metal was done sliding closed over it. Where did it come from? Had it been there the whole night? No! He almost screamed at himself. Stop thinking about it! Focus! Focus! The instructions for replacing her beak were much more simple, luckily. Both the endoskeleton of her beak and the shell of it were damaged, and it took a few reads of the instructions to understand and go through the right procedure. Step 1 was the same message about paralyzing her. Step 2, clip all damaged parts wiring from the nearest pinch point. This will clear the way for new wires without needing to replace larger parts. Refer to diagram to keep track of all damaged or missing parts. He adjusted to that, taking the clippers again, aiming. The endoskeleton of her beak was totally gone, so he just needed to cut off the torn bits of wires that were still hanging on to the pinch point. He got through them all with no problem, moving on to the next step. Step 4. Splice the wires of the beak together at the nearest pinch point. Oh no, he groaned. Gregory got the splicing tool, trying to find an angle that wouldn't cost him his fingers. He managed to find a way into the sides instead, keeping clear of her beak as he began to splice it together. Snap! She had almost bitten him. He jolted, then closed his eyes, trying to calm himself. The beak's skeleton was just going to be like that for a few minutes. It was fine. What wouldn't be fine was him messing up and aligning her wires wrong. He continued, trying to take a hold of his fears. He spliced. 1, 2, 3... Snap! He nearly broke something on that one. The splices box had scraped into the next wire. He focused, biting back the quivering in his hands, aligning it again. He finished the last few, then snatched his fingers away, waiting, watching. Chica didn't move. Okay, he sighed. Okay, we're good, Gregory searched through the manual front and back, beginning to panic as he read the table of contents. There's no instructions on replacing the shell of her beak, Gregory said, looking back up to Freddy. Yes, that's not really a procedure, Freddy explained. Her beak is just meant to be replaced and cleaned several times throughout the day to avoid bad breath. Just clip it on, like the shell of her head. Oh, good, Gregory sighed, lining it up right and clipping it together. He only calmed down a little whenever Chica was done, helping Freddy put her accessories back on so that she would be cleaner. Inevitably, he unparalyzed her and left the room, Freddy following. He signed something to DJ, who nodded and shuffled around. One of his giant gloved hands reached into Chica's room, finding her and picking her up carefully. He gathered Chica beside Moon, settling them down to recover. Roxy's turn. Gregory and Freddy went to the last room, Monty already standing there with a guilty look on his face. We could take your collar off first, Monty offered hopefully. Roxy just kept on scowling up at the ceiling. Freddy got the big loppers and started working away at it. Roxy's actually looked similar to a dog tag, a little green chip of metal dangling down, disguising it. Gregory found Roxy's manual as Freddy removed her collar, deciding to do her arm first. He read over the instructions, this time knowing what to do. Wait, but... Roxy stammered, interrupting him. Will you have to take off my face? There was an uncharacteristic tremble in her voice. Yeah, probably, if we're gonna try and fix your eyes. Gregory shrugged. Roxy's paws reached up to her head and then stopped, mouth pulled tight in fear. It won't hurt, Freddy reassured. You'll be paralyzed, remember? That didn't seem to help. But, wait, I don't... Roxy protested. No, can't you find some other way? Why? She didn't respond for a while, eventually bursting out with, You have to be wrong! Read it again! There's no way I'm gonna let you... Without warning, Monty grabbed her and opened the hatch beneath her hair, turning on the paralysis. Roxy began to yell, but fell limp instead, the word dying in her throat. Freddy and Gregory looked from her to Monty with their mouths open. "What?" Monty said, already heading away to get to the parts that he had found. "We don't have time for this. We're in a hurry. Let's go!" Seeing Roxy like this brought on another wave of guilt, the same type that he had felt for Chica. He remembered being happy, so happy whenever he had shot her until she was blind. But now, he only felt weirdly ashamed of it. Sure, she was mean, sure, he didn't like her, but whatever. He was fixing it now. It wasn't permanent, at least. Monty showed them to an arm that he had found, explaining, They don't have any hands for the arms. Those are apparently expensive too, so don't tell her." Gregory nodded and got to work. Punishment, he remembered. This was his punishment for hurting her. He clipped off the old shell of her arm, Freddy helping to set the big thing aside. He stayed out of the way, clipping through the wires. This time, when it jolted, he didn't react, feeling proud of himself at that. After checking with the instructions, he found the uncapping mechanism and set it up to the joint. After 3 violent jabs, he was able to remove the shattered parts with no problem. Freddy brought the new arm to him, helping to connect the endoskeleton back to the joints. When it was time to splice, Gregory was even more careful, not sure which direction the arm would jerk. He spliced the first wire, nothing. Second, third, nothing. He got all the way to the end and then stopped, knowing that it was coming. He did the last. Nothing. He let go, backing up. Her arm spasmed, swiping at empty air, before relaxing again. He stayed quiet for a few more seconds. "Are you done?" he asked irritably. She didn't move again, so he began to put the shell back on. When that was over, Freddy and Gregory stood back, both of them unable to look away from her burnt eye sockets. "And you said that she had no spare eyes?" Freddy asked. "Yeah, none," Monty said from outside the room. "I'm sorry." Freddy thought in silence for a few moments. We need her to be able to function," he said. Maybe I could give her one of my eyes?" Gregory's mouth dropped open, a chill clenching deep inside of him. Are you sure?" Gregory asked. "I'll still be able to see with just one," Freddy said, clearly trying to appear confident with a straighter back and a neutral expression. "If Roxy needs it, I'm fine giving one up." The big metal bear was already lying down on the floor, saying, "Gregory, go find my manual. There's probably instructions on how to replace eyes there." Gregory exchanged a look with Monty, but then nodded, feeling a bit sick as he looked around, finding the manual and returning to the room. As Gregory kneeled down at Freddy's head, he only just began to understand what he was about to do. Are you sure about this?" Gregory squeaked. "Yes," Freddy said with certainty. "I know you can do it, Gregory. I trust you." "When you're paralyzed," he asked hesitantly, "can you still see what's going on?" Freddy paused and then said, "Yes, we don't go to sleep during paralysis, but it won't hurt until I'm unparalyzed." Gregory swallowed anxiously, nodding down to the floor, scooting over to the back of his head. He found the same panel that he had identified on all the others and clicked it off. Freddy went limp once the switch was flicked. Cold all over, Gregory found an eye replacement procedure. The first step was about the paralysis. The second step, of course, was to remove his face. He found the clips beneath the faceplate, pulling at them one by one. He slowed at the last one, still jumping a little as his face popped out. Doing it to Moon and Chica had been bad enough, but doing it to Freddy made his stomach clench into sickness. He tried not to think about it as he pried his face off, setting it aside. Beneath was the same tangled parts that Chica had. The points where his faceplate were attached were now just sticking out as little studs, his blue eyeballs staring blankly out against the engine-like endoskeleton of the head. The strong urge to cry cut deeply into him as he looked at it all, trying not to make eye contact. It was horrible to see him like this. Just horrible. Before moving on from that feeling, Gregory froze up. Between Freddy's eyes was another small white box. He looked back to the diagram, horror growing. Gregory stared at it, trying not to look Freddy in the eye, dread flooding up inside of him. He knew he had to get rid of it. With shaking fingers, he picked it open, peeking inside. Gregory snapped his hands over his face, trying not to heave. No, please, no. He had to remove them. He had no doubt in his mind that Freddy would want these things out of his face. Gregory tried to work quickly, getting the garbage can near, hands trembling as he reached in and started to collect them. They made a noise like dice being rolled across a table, dry and cold to the touch. Dozens of tiny white teeth were dropped into the trash. He eventually got to all of them, pushing the box closed, covering his eyes and taking deep breaths. Don't throw up. Don't. He shoved the manual into his face, trying to forget about it as fast as possible, the idea of what he still had to do prowling up behind him. Step 3. Disconnect the eye from the socket. There is a small section of the supporting socket that can be slid out of the way to release the eye. Catch the eye before it falls out. It will shatter easily. Trying to make sure that he wouldn't puke, Gregory poked around his left eye. He found the small slit that they were talking about, picking at it until he pulled the inner mechanisms away. He cupped his hand beneath it, ready to catch it. The first click. His belly cramped. Freddy was watching him right now, watching as he took his eye. He wanted to cry again, but continued, trying to be strong. With several tiny clicks, the eye shifted and then popped out under the palm of his hand. He snapped his mouth closed, taking several deep breaths. This was going to hurt Freddy so badly. He hated that he had to be the one to do it. "I'm sorry," he told him, guilt tearing him up. The eye was still attached at the back by several colored wires, each one leading down to the support into the engine in the back of his head. Shivering, Gregory checked the next step. Step 4. Clip all damaged parts wiring from the nearest pinch point. This will clear the way for new wires without needing to replace larger parts. Refer to the diagram to keep track of all damaged or missing parts. Gregory found the pinch points, clipping through each one, releasing every colored wire until the eye was free. He ignored the rest of the procedure for now, setting the glass eye down carefully and skipping to the end. Step 6. Reattach shell of head at the points shown below. Gregory picked up Freddy's face again, throat tight as he clicked it back into place. When he pushed on it, it locked into a slack, blank expression. The place where his eye had been was now an empty black socket, the rectangular pinch point glinting out at the back. Gregory kept the blue eye close, moving back around to the back of Freddy's head, hesitating. Bracing for what was to come, he clicked the switch back on. Freddy didn't immediately start moving, still recovering from the paralysis. But still, Gregory hugged his tiny arms around his broad shoulders, repeating, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Gregory wanted to stay with Freddy to try and comfort him, but he knew he had to hurry. They were running out of time. He went back to Roxy and started to remove her face as fast as possible. As he did that, something felt off. He set the shell aside, lifting his finger so that he could see what he touched. Smears of purple and gray paint had been taken off of her plating. He could still see the strange claw marks beneath the paint, something that, again, didn't make any sense to him. He knew that the blaster had melted her eyes, but did it also melt parts of her face? He didn't put much thought into it. Freddy made a noise. He looked back, seeing that his hand was clenching and unclenching. "I'm sorry, Freddy," Gregory told him, trying to go fast, wanting to get this out of the way as fast as possible. As he peeled Roxy's face away, he stopped. "Oh," he said. No, I can't." "What's wrong?" Monty asked from outside. "There's another white box." Silence. He gulped down several breaths, popped the white box open, and peeked inside. Again, he snapped the thing closed, gasping, staring up at the fluorescent lights of the ceiling, his stomach heaving. He removed them with the clipper, just pinching them and throwing them into the trash can as fast as he could. He made the mistake of glancing down into the garbage where they rested. 2 eyes, real fleshy ones, stared back at him, the optic nerve only a shriveled maroon strand trailing behind them. The worst part, though, was that they were brown eyes. Gregory shook that thought away, not wanting to believe it. No, brown eyes were the most common color. It didn't mean they were... Gregory just tried to continue, not wanting to think about it, just wanting to get out of this horrible place already. Step 4. Take the replacement eyes wires and reattach them to the socket's pinch points. If there is damage beyond the eyes, see Step 7. Gregory guided Freddy's eye wires to the base of the socket, taking the splicing tool and reconnecting them, aligning each color with the right ones. Or at least trying to. It hadn't been just her eyes that had been damaged. Her entire socket was scorched and warped. Some were melted into each other, crossing over several colors. The light and dark ones looked the worst. Still, though, he had no choice. Red, orange, yellow. The eye moved. It was looking right at him. He kept on going. Green, blue, purple, pink. All of them still weren't perfect from the burns, but Gregory just continued anyway, knowing that this is going to be an imperfect solution. Finally, after connecting light and dark, he closed up the pinch point. Step 5. Reconnect the eye to the socket. Pull the optic wires back so the eye is sitting on the socket, and then clip it into place as shown below. Gregory reeled the new eye in, doing as it said. Letting go cautiously, the bright blue eye stuck. Gregory carefully put Roxy's face back on, jumping at each click around her head, until things were back in their rightful place. It wasn't over. Just one last person was approaching, already wincing apprehensively. "Gregory," Monty said, "I'm sorry, but you have to check behind my face." "What?" "There was something behind Chica and Roxy and Freddy's face," he said, and I think there's something behind mine too." "But I don't," he started to say. "Gregory, please," Monty begged, his expression full of so much panic it felt like an ice cube had been sent down his throat. Get it out, you have to get it out." Gregory knew it had to be done. So Monty lied down against the wall, eyes bugged out, claws clenched tight, chest shuddering with breaths. As Gregory paralyzed him and found the clips around his face, Freddy yelped in pain. A hand clasped over his empty socket, groaning. He looked like he was trying to get up, but couldn't quite move himself correctly yet. "I'm sorry." Gregory left Monty, hugging Freddy instead. "I'm sorry, Freddy, I'm so sorry." No, you did good," Freddy stammered out, words slurred and broken apart in the struggle to move again. "Did so well. Thank you. He looked back to Monty, who was still lying there, shut down. Gregory picked around the edges of his face, unlocking all of the clasps, finally pulling it away. The structure of his was different from the others, probably because of his long jaws. Most of the jaws looked like part of his shell, but he had extra protruding parts to move his mouth, the skeleton of the top and lower gums lined with teeth like a bear trap. And there, between his pink eyes, was the little white box. Just one more. That was all he had to do. Gregory picked it open, peeking inside, the expected wave of nausea returning. There were so many. He dragged the trash can close, picking the fleshy pieces up one by one and throwing them away. The red still stuck to him, clinging on in crusty messes as he desperately tried to wipe it all off on the bin's edge. He tried not to look at the pile in the trash can as he tried to clean beneath his chipped nails. Still, he caught a glimpse of it all, throat clenching shut. It was 10 tiny severed fingers, each no larger than Gregory's. Gregory couldn't take it anymore. Ghastly images assaulted him all together, all at once, too much. He doubled over and threw up onto the concrete floor. He was on all fours, coughing and gasping, his elbows shaking worse than they had ever had before. Tears trickled down to the end of his nose, dripping to add to the mess. Gregory took several deep breaths, then dragged himself up to his feet, trying to go on. He absolutely refused to bring up the possibility of DJ having that box too. He couldn't take any more of this. Gregory put Monty's face back on and unparalyzed him. After that, he returned to Freddy, who was only just beginning to be able to sit up. He still had a hand clamped over his missing eye, but he seemed to be slowly adjusting to the pain. "I'm sorry," Gregory said to him, guilt still tugging from deep inside of him, not wanting to look at the pile of sick. "Oh, you did really well," Freddy reassured him. "I'm so proud of you, superstar. You're so brave." Outside, Chica was beginning to wake up, several words coming on in a spastic strand, not yet making sense.
Hello, Gregory. Hello, new speak. Ouchie. Sorry.
Gathering himself, Gregory stood and watched as Freddy started to get up, hauling himself to his feet and stretching out his limbs again. It hadn't been a large procedure for him, so it seemed that he was regaining mobility much faster than the others. Gregory leaned out into the hall, saying, "Okay, everyone's fixed now." DJ tilted his head at first, but after Freddy got to the door and signed something to him, he understood. Gregory's eye was caught by the state that Freddy was in. His shell was absolutely covered in claw marks from both Roxy and Moon, silvery specks peeking out from the patches of ripped-out fur. Monty was the same, several soft scales now ripped off, a long scratch on his snout wrinkling up his reptilian features even more. Do you want to get your shells replaced?" Gregory asked. Freddy glanced down at himself and then shook his head. "No, it's not any real damage. You don't have to do all of that just for cosmetic stuff." DJ shifted his weight around, reaching one of his huge arms into the hall. Gregory stayed back and watched as the big gloved hand took Roxy and then Monty, gathering them together with Moon and Chica. Freddy made his way out into the hall, still keeping a hand on the wall as he approached the rest of them. Chica was sitting up, stretching out her new leg and trying to produce vocal tones, while Moon still struggled to move himself. All of them kept away from the moat full of mangled staff bots, trying not to look down at them. Nobody mentioned the things that they had found in their faces. It didn't happen, Gregory decided. It was over and done. It didn't change anything. It didn't mean anything. He didn't have to think about it anymore because it didn't matter. It didn't happen. Instead of thinking about that, he forced himself into something else. Even though all of them were now fixed, that same guilt pushed at him harder, demanding to be heard. Gregory looked back up to Freddy, opening and closing his mouth a few times, trying to gather his words. His dry tongue refused to cooperate, his throat feeling like it had been stuffed with gravel. Come on, say it. When it felt like the awkward hesitance would last forever, Gregory managed to speak up and say, "Freddy? Yes?" "I'm really sorry about lying to you," Gregory said. He could no longer stand the sight of his face, turning his head down to stare at his old sneakers instead. "About what I did to your friends, I mean," he said. "I was just scared. I thought you might kill me if I said anything." Freddy moved back like he had been startled by the statement. "What? No, Gregory, I would never hurt you," he sighed, his voice much gentler than he expected. "I know that you were just afraid. They were attacking you, and you had no choice." Freddy kneeled down to give him a hug, letting Gregory bury himself inside of his soft, warm fur. doesn't really mean I was pleased when I saw what you did to them, Freddy added, but you helped fix them. I'm sure that they'll be able to forgive you. There was quiet for a bit, and Gregory hoped that that was the end of it. But soon it became clear that they were waiting for him to respond. Gregory lifted his head towards the pile of animatronics. They were all still struggling to get up, but from what Freddy said before, Gregory knew that they could still hear him. I'm sorry for clobbering all of you, Gregory said, trying to laugh a little bit in his nervousness. I get it if you all hate me now. Chica was the first one to speak, finally sitting up and looking over to him. For a moment, he expected those eyes to twist into fury, for her talons to snap down onto him. But instead, her squishy face creased into a smile, her new beak glimmering in the light of her orange eyes. When she spoke, it was confirmed to them all that her voice was fixed, letting her sound like herself again. No, Gregory, it's fine. I don't... They were cut off by a sudden surge of panicked notes from DJ. They were frantic and fast, his hand pointing to the hefty silvery elevator at the end of Parts and Services hallway. The red numbers above the door were lit up now, counting down. Someone was coming. Gregory was yanked up by Freddy automatically, disappearing into the safety of his writing compartment. Just as fast, DJ flopped down, chin resting on his hands, closing his eyes. But the others... Moon was only just beginning to see that there was a problem at all. Chica tried and failed to get up, and Monty and Roxy were still completely limp. With another burst of notes, DJ batted them all over the edge, making them fall directly into the scrap pit. They crashed heavily on the dented pieces of metal with several tumbling clangs, the cries of Freddy, Chica, and Moon shocking the air. Immediately, Gregory was face down in a pile of stained metal, Freddy's compartment barely keeping him from touching it. The smell of rust scraped invasively down his throat with every gulp of air, stinging his eyes, causing involuntary shivers to take over. Freddy tried to lurch up and escape, but DJ's hand passed over all of them, burying them deeply into the pit, out of sight. Freddy struggled at first. The others did too. But, one by one, they all had the sense to force themselves into silence. DJ was pretending to sleep again by the time the elevator doors opened. Humming. She was humming. Gregory didn't move. He couldn't. The tiny space pressed at him from every angle, trapping him like a spider in a jar. Through a tiny slot in Freddy's torso, he could see the arm of a scrapped staff bot, one of its blocky fingers torn off, replaced by frayed wires. He bit his tongue, closing his eyes, listening. Vanessa stepped out of the elevator. The extra clatter of her feet told him that she was inside of her suit again. She stopped. She didn't move from that spot for so long, he wondered if she wasn't actually there. But then, with a, Vanessa walked out into the hall. Her footsteps tapped over the metal floor, one after another, almost entirely quiet. And then, another set of footsteps followed her. The new sound sent chills over his skin. A second pair of bulky, clunking footsteps dragged themselves out into the open. One foot came down heavier than the other, something extra scraping against them, making the thing move in uneven lurches. The unexplained breathing returned, just as it had before. It sent fear prickling through his skin. The sound was just out of reach, dragging in and out, seeming to come from the air itself. And behind that was the heartbeat. Gregory's arteries pounded against his ribcage, trying to think of a million excuses of what that sound could be, finding none that made any sense. "Over here," Vanessa said, opening one of the doors. The limping stranger followed her in. The heavy, safe-like door clanked shut, locking the two of them inside. They were doing something in the rooms, scrapes and clicks. Gregory couldn't breathe. The smell of rust scorched his nostrils thick and overwhelmingly sharp. It burrowed beneath his fingernails, digging into his scalp, getting beneath his sticking eyelids. His lungs were trying to spasm and force it out, but each time they did, another breath of the reeking poison would come in. And still, the whole while, the unidentified heartbeat quickened. Closer, closer. Gregory closed his eyes, trying to get control of himself again. Just be quiet, be quiet. A tap. Gregory ignored the sound at first, thinking that it was just some cockroach. He continued to take in measured breaths, counting to 10 and back again. Calm, stay calm. She wouldn't find them. She wouldn't. Another tap. 2 more after that one. When a 5th tap came, Gregory's counting faltered. Something was touching the outside of Freddy's shell. Gregory's eyes snapped open, fixating on the slot. The pit was moving. The only part he could see was the staffbot's finger. It was the thumb, twitching, curling, relaxing again, tapping. Dozens of other scrapped bots were doing the same, the little metal fingers scratching and poking at Freddy like the sound of hail on a car window. Freddy was shaking. He almost made a noise, struggling as his instincts clearly tried to convince him to convulse, to get up out of the pit, to run far, far away. He realized with alarm that Freddy wasn't going to last much longer. Gregory shut his eyes again, deciding that this time Freddy needed his guidance. Don't move, Gregory whispered, knowing that Vanessa wouldn't be able to hear him from inside the occupied maintenance room. Think of something else. Close your eyes and count to 10. Anything can work, just don't move. A whimper rung out from Freddy. The tapping was beginning to become scrapes. The little rusty fingers scraped their jagged edges against him. Gregory could hear the hand reaching into the slot only inches away, but no matter how much his eyes begged him to, he did not look. 1, 2, 3. He began counting, still murmuring as low as he could get. 4, 5, 6. A loud clang from the rooms made him jump, accidentally bumping his head against Freddy's insides. Freddy shuddered again, starting to say something, then stopped himself. 7, 8. Gregory continued steadily, still not daring to open his eyes. 9, 10. The dented fingers touched him. They were messing with his hair, leaving gritty marks behind on his forehead, tugging at the strands. Instead, Gregory started again. 10, 9, 8. They were a dead machine, just another dead machine. The doors opened. 2 sets of clunky footsteps led out, one heavier than the other. They were still there, go away, go away. The dry fingers tugged at his hair, harder. Vanessa would definitely be able to hear him now, so he continued the countdown by patting his fingers intermittently on the inside of Freddy's writing compartment, keeping the same slow tempo. 7, 6, 5. The heavier footsteps moved back to the elevator. But Vanessa's didn't follow. She stood in the hall instead. 4, 3, 2. Gregory strained his ears for anything wrong. Surely she wouldn't notice. Surely. 1. Vanessa slowly began to move towards the pit. A burst of doom overcame him. He tried to keep it down. She prowled up to where DJ was pretending to sleep, taking her sweet time, stopping right in front of him. She waited, listened. He realized all too late what had tipped her off. DJ wasn't snoring. Panic jerked wildly in his chest, the rusty fingers pulling out several strands of hair, sending tiny twinges of pain through his scalp. Be still, he reminded himself. Count, breathe, don't move. Vanessa's gaze swept over the pit. He could feel it as clearly as he would feel a blowtorch. He waited, held on. Finally, Vanessa hissed what sounded like a curse under her breath.
Damn it.
She hurried back to the hall where she left the second person. Together, the two of them gathered in the elevator again. It slid closed, dinging cheerfully, and lifted their hellish presence away. The moment its whirring faded into the ceiling, the silence shattered to pieces. Get us out! Get us out! Roxy wailed. DJ's frantic staccato notes were audible beneath the scraping of him digging around, fishing them all out one by one. Freddie and Gregory were lifted out much too late, his hair ripped out of the finger's grasp. They flew away into the air and were placed on solid, clean ground again. The others were dropped beside him one by one, each either crying or gasping or struggling to stay upright. For a while, they just lied there, trying to recover, mortification still hitting them in ferocious waves. Gregory knocked. Freddie let him out onto the cold floor. Freddie was still staring at the scrap heap, unblinking, fangs clenched tight and ears pinned flat against his head in shivering revulsion. Rusty fingerprints covered his scratched shell. Seeing Freddie like this, it was just plain unnatural in a deeply unsettling way. It was wrong. Nothing should ever be able to do this to him. Not Freddie. Gregory hugged him, trying to give some comfort back to the loving bear. Freddie snapped out of it with the contact, holding him tight. His claws pricked into Gregory's back, but he didn't so much as wince. He just stayed with him. Is everyone okay? Freddie called hoarsely, not letting go of Gregory. Are you all in line again? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm okay. Chica's voice spoke again, still scratchy, but there. Roxy was sitting there in absolute silence, touching her face with her remaining paw. Her singular blue eye flickered, not yet focusing on anything. He had no idea if it was even working right. Monty was quiet as well, hugging his tail close. Moon tried to get up, but fell again, caught by DJ as he tried to steady himself. Freddie stood, turning away from the scrap pit, looking over them all. Every one of them reflected the same hollow in their eyes. We're done here, Freddie said emptily. Let's just go. Entry 1, March 13th, 2061. We have... Entry 2, April 3rd, 2061. Subject 1 is proving to be quite a handful. He started off being curious, asking about our different jobs, where he is, and when he can leave. We unfortunately couldn't answer the last question. If someone saw him, it would all be over. We are working to make him as comfortable as possible, but it's difficult because of how large he is. Once Subject 1 found out how limiting his position was, he quickly grew resistant and tried to escape. Someone almost saw him. Now he seems to understand why he can't leave. He has luckily calmed down after that, but his rebellious streak seems to have no end. He complains loudly about even the littlest things and takes every opportunity to jab at me or sabotage whatever task I'm trying to complete. I expected myself to be frustrated with him, but I'm not. All of this, his banter and dry humor and sarcasm, it's a sign that he's real. He's not just an AI. I let it slip that he reminds me of my daughter and son. Subject 1 asked me if they know about what I'm doing down here. They don't. But I promised him that they will eventually. I have no doubt that Subject 1 will hold me to that. Victor Miller. Hello everyone again. Sorry if this chapter was kind of boring. Also, as a sort of disclaimer, I do want to say here that I'm not a technician, obviously, so the way that Gregory fixed the animatronics and how they're built is probably not perfectly scientifically accurate to how real robots work, but, you know, hopefully I have enough wiggle room just because this is 2087, so they could have found ways to simplify machinery and make it easier to handle and stuff. And, you know, besides, at the end of the day, my version is not any worse than the game's version, which is literally just Simon Says. Anyway, thanks for getting to the end. I hope you all enjoyed it. Woo! That's all I have to say. Bye! Thanks for watching.